Devil's Dyke was an early attraction for humans living in the Stone Age. Settlements sprang up across the country's longest, widest and deepest valley, which was overseen by an Iron Age hill fort. Our Stone Age ancestors spotted the benefits of settling on the undulating landscape of Devil's Dyke. Indeed, dyke is a Saxon word for a fence or entrenchment built from earth, stone or wood. Early settlers built simple enclosures, long barrows and flint mines. By the Bronze Age, more and more larger communities were living around the valley. As human skills and a sense of society evolved, these early settlers put together more and more sophisticated shelters and homes. The high ground of Devil's Dyke provided an excellent site for an Iron Age hill fort, and remnants of ramparts and round barrows have survived. However, the Anglo-Saxons abandoned the settlements that had congregated at the top of the South Downs to move to the lower river valleys, coastal plain and Weald. Geologists describe Devil's Dyke as the most famous dry valley in the English chalk. Its steep sides and sharp curve are regarded as an unusual and important quaternary landform. With its proximity to the fashionable resort of Brighton, its unparalleled views and the lure of the legend of its creation, Devil's Dyke began to attract tourists from all walks of life. Royal interest emerged in the 1750s when Lieutenant William Roy undertook the survey and sketch of the coast of Sussex for King George II. As Brighton enjoyed more and more royal favour, the dyke's natural beauty grew in fame, and high society could be seen travelling out of the town to enjoy the majestic landscape and coastline. Tales spread of King William IV and Queen Adelaide driving a carriage up to Devil's Dyke. Queen Victoria is said to have ridden out on horseback while staying at the Brighton Pavilion just before her marriage to Prince Albert. In 1818, a small wooden hut serving refreshments was erected on Dyke Hill. This was replaced in 1831 by a small inn, which was bought and restored in 1835 by early entrepreneur Mr. William Thacker, with a view to attracting more tourists. His business venture was helped by the opening of the London to Brighton Railway 5 years later in 1840. The seaside resort was now within easy reach of the capital, and the popularity of the South Downs primary viewing spot escalated. However, the journey from the coast took at least an hour in bumpy and uncomfortable horse-drawn brakes, so a 3-mile branch of railway track was laid to Devil's Dyke summit. The new transport link opened in 1887 and ferried sightseers in increasing numbers to enjoy the magnificence of this unique geological feature. A thriving tourist industry had begun. Game hunter and traveller Mr. H.J. Hubbard bought the Dyke estate in 1892 and set about turning Devil's Dyke into a pioneering adventure park. The marvels of modern engineering were intermingled with a multitude of games and funfair rides. Merry-go-rounds, bicycle railways, coconut shies and fortune tellers festooned the hill in the late 19th century. Perhaps the greatest mechanical feat achieved during Mr. Hubbard's tenure was the opening of Britain's first aerial cable car in 1894. This ran across the Dyke and presented a view of the magnificent panoramas never seen before. Mr. Hubbard was also responsible for the funicular railway, which operated on the steep scarp slope on the north side of Dyke Hill. The steep grade railway opened in 1897 and gave visitors to the Dyke the opportunity to descend to Poynings for a Sussex tea without the arduous and time-consuming climb back up from the village. The Brighton to Devil's Dyke Railway was a branch line from the Brighton to Portsmouth South Coast Railway line. It carried 159,500 passengers in its first year and continued to be popular until the internal combustion engine took over from the horse and road travel became faster and more convenient. A railway from Brighton to Devil's Dyke was first proposed in 1872, but early schemes failed due to a lack of support, objections from local landowners and unsympathetic attitudes of the existing South Coast Railways directors. Eventually an agreement was reached with the London, Brighton and South Coast Railways directors and work began in summer 1883. After delays caused by funding issues and construction problems due to the hardness of the chalk for the last 3/4 of a mile, the railway finally opened on the 1st of September 1887. The noon train from Brighton took the company chairman, the directors, a large number of shareholders and influential residents to an opening ceremony at Devil's Dyke. The train was decorated with flags and bunting. The band of the 1st Sussex Artillery entertained the guests, and the wife of the chairman declared the railway open. The new service was immediately popular with the public, particularly on Sundays. Previously, travel to the Dyke from Brighton had been undertaken by horse-drawn wagonette. A round trip was a fixed 3 hours, with the journey taking over an hour each way, leaving less than an hour to enjoy the views and amusements. The train took less than half an hour, cost only 5 shillings third class, and visitors could return whenever they wished. The Brighton to Dyke Railway ran for 51 years and closed on the 31st of December 1938. Except on bank holidays, numbers have been falling for years, particularly in the winter. Soon the railway was no longer economically viable. By the 1930s, road travel was more affordable and visitors preferred to travel to Devil's Dyke by bus or car. The last journey was the 5:07 p.m. from Brighton Station, returning from the Dyke at 5:37 p.m. Fog signals and engine whistles were sounded as the train pulled out. Passengers in the saloon coach sang to the music of a band playing. People waved from their houses along the line and crowds cheered from the platforms. More fog signals sounded at the Dyke as the final train prepared to leave, and Brighton station master Mr. T.F. Roach put out the special destination boards. Journey's End, 1887 to 1938. Devil's Dyke did not remain untouched by the horrors of the First World War. The mechanical marvels of the former Victorian fun fair were dismantled and replaced by a military bomb testing ground. By 1918 the government had requisitioned Devil's Dyke and transformed it from an adventure park into a munitions research and testing ground. Although there are few known facts and little remaining evidence, it is clear that the military was making a new generation of weapons in the hope of breaking the 4-year stalemate on the Western Front. The geography of Devil's Dyke provided an ideal bomb testing site. Bombs were suspended from cables that were hung from a framework of pylons and trolley tracks built on each side of the valley. They could then be dropped from a height of up to 250 feet to ensure they were fully armed before impact. Researchers also found the remnants of a small concrete building on Devil's Dyke estate that was identified as a bomb house and possibly used to make and store detonators. Steel sheets lined the walls as blast protection, and troops could take cover in a dugout just outside the building during bomb testing. However, few bombs were detonated. Construction work was only completed in early November of 1918, just days before the armistice and the end of the First World War. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 signalled the end of peacetime tranquility enjoyed by Sussex sheep farmers on Devil's Dyke. By 1942, Canadian soldiers had moved onto the newly requisitioned South Downs training area to defend the south coast against invasion. Between the First and Second World Wars, Devil's Dyke had retained some of its allure as a natural beauty spot, but sheep farming was the main peacetime activity at that time. Local shepherds drove their sheep over the South Downs to local markets in Albourne and Findon. A flock of around 300 breeding ewes reared at Saddlescombe Farm were also kept at the Dyke. However, the War Office commandeered most of the area as a training ground in the early 1940s. The Saddlescombe farm flocks were moved further down the coast to Eastbourne and never returned. By 1942, sheep had been replaced by soldiers and farmers had to adjust to a new way of working the land. The 1st Canadian Army took over Devil's Dyke Hotel as its headquarters and set up defensive positions around the newly designated South Downs training area. Security was tight and local farmhands found themselves at the sharp end of military secrecy, censorship and restricted movement, all of which were rigorously enforced. Barbed wire entanglements replaced fences, roads were closed and howitzer guns were parked in laybys to keep locals as well as the enemy out. Although farmhands were allowed to go about their business and cross the training area, they were frequently stopped and checked for German infiltrators and spies. For the next 2 years, tanks, tracked vehicles and heavy military equipment battered Devil's Dyke. The area became littered with foxholes, flint barns were destroyed and unexploded munitions left scattered across the land as the Canadians undertook large-scale training exercises to prepare for the 1944 D-Day landings and liberation of France.